About 9 months ago, I began working as a hospital security guard at a major hospital in my city. When I first started the job and was shown around the various buildings, the old clinic, which we'll call the asbestos clinic due to its history of asbestos issues, immediately stood out to me. It's a building that, in my opinion, should have been demolished long ago. During my initial walkthrough, a fellow guard told me that this building was haunted by a young girl who took her own life on the second floor. He also mentioned that the basement was haunted. The whole building used to be a tuberculosis sanatorium back in the 1950s and 60s, with tunnels in the basement that were once used to transport bodies. About a month ago, it was my turn to work at the clinic during a night shift, and I was determined to experience some paranormal activity. I had done countless patrols of the asbestos clinic before, but nothing much had happened aside from the elevators occasionally opening on their own, which was apparently normal. But that night, things changed. I had heard plenty of stories from other guards about strange occurrences in the clinic, but I had never experienced anything myself. I decided to do my patrol at 3 a.m., which is often said to be the prime time for paranormal activity. I began my patrol by walking around the exterior of the building, checking all the entrances to ensure they were locked. The building closes relatively early, around 8 p.m., so by then it should be completely empty. However, I noticed that one of the exterior doors was slightly open. This concerned me because it had been closed during my first patrol. The building doesn't have any interior cameras, so when something like this happens at night, I have to check every unlocked room inside to make sure no one is inside. I entered the building and started my patrol of the first floor, checking every door and hallway. No one was there. As I approached the elevator to go up to the second floor, I heard a faint creaking sound, like a door opening. I immediately radioed my team lead, informing her that I had found an open door and was hearing noises. I told her I was going to conduct a thorough patrol, and she sent one of the guards from the cancer clinic, whom we'll call Fred, to assist me. After searching the first floor again and finding nothing, Fred arrived. He told me he would start searching the third and fourth floors while I covered the second floor and basement. As I was searching the second floor, I heard the same creaking noise again, the sound of a door opening. I radioed Fred to come down, still not considering the possibility of anything paranormal. We've had incidents of homeless people breaking in to find a place to sleep, though it's rare for them to target the asbestos clinic since it's usually locked. We searched every room on the second floor but found nothing. After thoroughly checking the entire clinic, we concluded that no one was inside. Fred returned to the cancer clinic, and my team lead made a joke that it was probably just a ghost. That got me thinking, this might be the perfect time to continue my ghost hunting. I went back into the building, determined to capture some activity. I sat down in a chair on the second floor, waiting to see if anything would happen. After about 10 minutes of nothing, I got bored and decided to head down to the basement. The basement is an eerie place, filled with tunnels that mostly lead to nowhere now. I decided to explore one of them since I had never done it before, and it seemed like the perfect time. Once I exited the elevator, I made my way to one of the locked doors leading to the longest tunnel. Most of the tunnels were completely blocked off, but this one stretched on. I unlocked the door and ventured down the tunnel, noting that my radio beeped to indicate that it had lost signal, a common issue in basement areas. As I reached the end of the tunnel, my flashlight started to flicker. I decided to stand still and listen, and to my shock, I heard a blood-curdling female scream coming from the start of the tunnel. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I turned around, pointing my flickering flashlight back toward the entrance, and started running toward the scream. When I reached the entrance, I tried to radio my team lead, but my radio was still out of signal. I looked around the basement and noticed that one of the doors was open. This door was supposed to be locked, with only security having access to the keys. I looked inside the room, which I'll show a picture of, but no one was there. My heart was racing. I closed the door and headed back upstairs to get a radio signal. I was still unsure if what I experienced was paranormal. Once I was back on the main floor, I radioed my team lead to let her know what happened. She sent Fred back to help me investigate the source of the scream. When he arrived, we went back to the basement. I showed him the room that had been opened, and we both noticed a very distinct and strong smell, like that of a decomposing body. Having spent time in the hospital morgue, I was all too familiar with that smell. We searched the room, but found nothing. Fred joked that the room might have been used for tuberculosis patients who didn't make it, but in truth, none of us were sure what that room had been used for. We determined that everything was fine, and I decided I had spent enough time in the asbestos clinic for one night. Ever since that experience, I've rushed through my patrols in the basement, as that smell still lingers every time I pass by that room. I was staying at my grandparents' house while they were on holiday. I was around 14 or 15 at the time, and was watching the house for them. I'd spent every weekend growing up there, and it was like a second home, but I'd always felt a little uneasy in the middle bedroom. It was always colder than the rest of the house, even when the heating was on, and the times I slept in there, I would alternate between that and the smaller spare bedroom. There seemed to be an atmosphere. I don't know how else to explain it. Anyway, on my first night of watching my grandparents' house, I'd had a great night being independent, had a takeaway, cleaned the dishes, and got myself to bed, putting the house alarm on my way up. I decided to sleep in my Nana and Granddad's bed since it was a double. I shut the door and turned the lights off to go to sleep. It must have been only around 20 minutes later when I heard the door from the middle room creak. Obviously, this scared me, and I turned on the lamp. About 5 minutes after this, I heard pacing, as if someone was walking to and fro behind the bedroom door. There was a floorboard that creaked slightly behind the door, which I would hear every few seconds. This lasted for around 20 minutes, during which I was frozen in fear, before I became brave and decided to push the bedside table up against the bedroom door. Things became quiet again until I heard the middle bedroom door creak again after about 5 minutes. I have never been so scared in my life. I watched the house for the rest of their trip, but made sure someone was with me. Nothing else happened. We lived in a two-flat in the Portage Park area of Chicago. From a young age, I saw and felt things in that place that I've never experienced since. We had an enclosed back porch, and at the landing between the upper and lower floors, I always sensed a presence. When I was a small child, I would throw stuff at it, mostly crayons and once an unlit candle. It scared me, and I think, as a kid, I was trying to provoke it in my mind. Physically, it appeared as a weird gray shadow, or a slightly dark static haze, but I could feel its presence. It was there until we moved away in 2001. My brothers and I also saw shadow people in our flat regularly, and the most prominent experience was on Easter 1997. I was 9 years old. I woke up early to check my Easter basket, and when I stepped into the dining room, I saw a kid standing under the couch cover in the front room. I thought it was my youngest brother, who was 3 at the time. I walked over to the couch cover and touched it to remove it. The clearly outlined child's shape collapsed back into a flat couch cover as soon as I touched it. I remember standing there for about 5 minutes, trying to understand what I had just experienced. It was bizarre because, after the cover settled back, it was like nothing had happened. I still don't know what it was, and I have no explanation for the child's outline under the couch cover. I've never experienced anything like that again. Another major experience I had was when I was on our computer playing a game. My arm started to feel hot, then cold, then hot again, and slowly a strong vibration went through my entire body, starting with my arm. I screamed, ran out of my room, and told my parents. Again, nothing actually came of it, but it left such a vivid impression on me that I needed to sleep with the light on after that. I've had an experience in the past where my friend's uncle showed himself to me like a regular person and tormented me for a week. He would slam all the doors and cabinets in the kitchen, shake the trailer I was in, pull me out of bed at night, yank off my blankets, poke me, point at my underarms, and run back and forth in the ceiling. Things eventually settled down, but I'll never forget that day. I was coming back from the restroom and thought my friend had invited someone over without telling me. When I returned, I looked through the crack in the door that was left open and saw a middle-aged Asian man with dark black hair, dark brown eyes, and a really nice white suit. I thought his shoes were amazing, but his look of total seriousness caught my attention. He was looking down, then he sharply locked eyes with me. He said, "I mean business. Don't mess around with me." But his mouth didn't move. It was telepathic. I quickly looked down for the door handle, ripped it open, and charged toward the chair where I had seen the man. No one was there except my friend. I asked, "Where is he?" "Who?" My friend said. "The guy you invited and didn't tell me about," I insisted. He looked confused and said, "What are you talking about? It's just me, no one else." I searched all over, but didn't find anyone. I felt stumped, but I just saw that dude like a regular human. Was he a spirit? No way, how could he do that? Why? I had so many questions. My friend didn't say anything at first. He thought I was just being weird again. Then he asked, "Did the guy you saw have thick black hair?" "Yeah, how did you know that?" "Did he have a receding hairline like a widow's peak?" "Yeah," I said, a bit surprised. "Was he wearing a white suit?" he asked. "Yeah," I explained. "We buried him in a white suit." "Williams, that's my uncle," he explained, and went on to tell me a story about his family and his uncle. I was so shocked. My previous house was an old brick duplex with an unfinished basement. The basement was what you'd expect for a 1920s house, lacking anything besides storage spaces, a laundry machine, and spiders. There was a space for the laundry at the base of the stairs, a little storage room to the left of it, and then a path that led 20-ish feet back to the furnace. I had my office down there for a while until the colder months exposed the poor insulation, so I was comfortable enough being down there. Maybe every now and then I would get the natural spooky basement vibes, but nothing too crazy, as long as I stuck to the laundry and storage space. There was something about the back area that I just didn't want to mess with, and luckily I never really had a reason to go back there. A few months before I moved out, I walked downstairs at night to change the laundry, and the basement felt filled with static energy. I had a long day and just decided to barrel through whatever weird vibes I may have been picking up on, and just coped with the notion it was lingering anxiety. I can remember this so clearly. As I turned to walk up the stairs, I just kind of froze, holding the laundry basket in my hands. I just saw this image of an old woman walking down the hall behind me. She's covered in gray, very disheveled. I can't see her face because she's in a shawl type of deal. Imagine an 80-year-old woman wearing a blanket to stay warm. That's the best I can do to describe her. This entire time it feels like what I've heard of a night terror. I can see right in front of me, but I'm seeing this woman walk up behind me, and I'm not moving. I can't. I can't focus on anything besides her. Physically, it feels like a panic attack, and she's just getting closer, one arm extended. And as I stand there, her arm touches my shoulder. I see it. I don't feel her hand, but immediately I am just overwhelmed by sadness. I can see half of her face in my mind, and her mouth is open, just wailing and sad. Again, I don't hear it, but I feel it, and I know that makes no sense. I felt sick and forced my foot forward. I ran up the stairs and hunched over my counter in the kitchen and had to do box breathing to calm down. It was the most intense experience I had at the house. While living in a room of the house with two other roommates, a friend spent the night over on a weekend eve. I gave her my bed. I was sleeping on a low floor-level trundle bed, placed perpendicularly next to her bed, so my feet were facing her side. In the middle of the night, I was startled out of a deep sleep by her yelling. I sat up in my dark room. Then I shockingly saw an extremely black, flitting shadow fighting with my friend. She was fighting and punching it, and it was flitting in quick jabs toward and away from her. I was paralyzed witnessing it in a state of shock and terror. I was able to yell at it, "Hey, get away from her." It stopped, looked at me, then attacked me. I have never felt bone-chilling cold like that as it brushed over me. It was hovering atop of my head, but then I was covering my head with my arms and had my eyes closed, as I felt this angry, cold presence start trying to saturate into me from the top of my head downward. I was desperate to get it off of me. I faintly heard my friend yelling, "No, get off of her." In a flash of an idea, my atheist self immediately said a prayer, and I saw in my mind's eye a picture of a kind being with his hand outstretched out in front of him, as if to protect me or ward it off. And it worked. The evil being slowly removed itself. I lifted my head, opened my eyes, just in time to see it fly up into the ceiling, and the room warmed back up again. I immediately went to my friend's side to console her, and she told me what she had experienced and seen before I told her my own view and experience. Previous to this, I had been a devout Catholic convert, but a staunch atheist. But I am still not religious. Yet I went from staunch atheist to being agnostic. And by the way, my other roommate also heard us that night. When I was 7, my family moved house. We moved to a street that was built on old tram tracks from around the 1900s. The line of terrace properties themselves were fairly new. When we moved in, they were only around 15 years old max. All of the properties have a rear garden that is divided by a meter-tall wooden fence. Each garden has a shared rear wall that is 7 feet tall and made of concrete. This wall separates the properties from the grounds of the local park. As a kid, I kept myself entertained. The age gap between my brothers and me at that age was enough to be left out of things, and my parents were recently divorced. I would make up games and act out imaginary scenes. It was not uncommon to find me playing by myself in the back garden. We had pet rabbits that lived in a hutch up against the back wall mentioned earlier. Being the curious child I was, I used to like to stand on the hutch and look over the wall into the park and people watch. I remember it being a warm night, and the sun was setting a bit later in the day. I don't remember the time exactly, but with the way the daylight plays in my memory, it was around 7 p.m. I was out in the garden, people watching from my rabbit hutch vantage point, when I had the sudden urge to look over my right shoulder. With the way my house is laid out, the kitchen is at the rear of the house. If I were to enter the house, I'd open the door and walk through the kitchen. My neighbor's house is a bit different. Their sitting room is at the rear instead. So I look over my right shoulder, and my neighbor's back door is open. There are no lights on, so it's dark in the sitting room, and I can't make anything out. But I know they have a sofa facing out, and it would be where I was looking. I see 2 red dots, spaced apart and not changing distance from one another, floating in the middle of this black room. I remember squinting, trying to figure out what I'm seeing. I swear these 2 dots move at a smooth arc to the right and upwards, as if they were eyes on a face of someone standing up from the sofa. As they move, they seem to get a bit closer to the door, and I can make out nothing except a dark silhouette. I freak out and run back inside, all the way to the front of the house where our sitting room is located, to tell my mom. She assures me it's nothing, and I head back outside. I climb back onto the rabbit hutch and immediately look behind me again. The figure with its red eyes is now standing in the doorway of their house, looking out into the garden. I note once more back into the house, and this time I do not go back outside. For years, I forgot about this experience, but I've always been afraid of the dark. I especially hate looking out of windows at night, particularly into the back garden. Something jogged my memory of it a few years ago, and every time I talk about it, it makes me want to cry because it scared me so much. I still remember every damn detail of that evening, and I wonder what it was I saw. My neighbors still live there, and I'm too scared to ask them if they've experienced anything, or if they have an explanation for what I saw. I've had a fairly normal childhood growing up in Vietnam, emigrating to the US when I was 13. Everything was typical until my senior year in high school. I'd just gotten back from wrestling practice and was exhausted, so I dozed off to sleep. This was followed by sleep paralysis, which back then was not very well known. After a few times of trying to wake myself, I finally woke up. I sat right up, my forehead and shirt damped with sweat. My heart was racing, and that was the first time I truly felt afraid. Things started to go wrong after that afternoon. A few months went by without another incident. I was taking a shower as usual. Suddenly, I felt someone watching me. I cleared off the shampoo from my face and looked out. Someone was in the bathroom looking at me. I couldn't see clearly through the frosted bathtub door. It was a male figure, in a light blue button shirt and tan slacks pulled up past the belly. He had a green hard hat, like one of those hats people wear in the jungle. I slid the frosted door open, and there was no one there. I didn't even finish showering. I dried off and got out of there. I chalked it up to my imagination. That night, my dad told me my grandpa had died, his dad, in Vietnam. We turned on Yahoo Messenger. Yes, I'm that old. And we watched part of the funeral procession on a webcam. A few weeks later, we received a DVD from Vietnam. It was common to videotape the funeral and send it to loved ones, especially if they couldn't be there in person. The DVD had a slideshow of my grandpa from when he was young to his last photo taken. I paused the DVD when I saw this. My grandpa, in his youth volunteer uniform, wearing a light blue button shirt, tan slacks, and a green wide-brimmed hard hat. I counted the time of his passing, and it was a few minutes before he appeared in the bathroom. The following year, we moved to a different apartment. Orange County is the home to the largest concentration of Vietnamese Americans, with a few generations being here since before the 70s. We were excited to move to a new, spacious 2-story apartment. I was going off to college, but I stayed at the home to save money. Nothing seemed out of place, although I occasionally had sleep paralysis. By that time, I understood the psychological reason behind those episodes, so knowing how it worked gave me peace. Until one night, I was studying well into the early morning, around 3 a.m., in the living room. I heard footsteps coming down the stairs from the upstairs bedroom. That was not too peculiar. People in my family would come down for a glass of water, or to tell me to turn down the TV. This time, however, it was my teenage sister. She had a dazed look on her face, walking sort of aimlessly through the living room into the kitchen. It was a weird, slow walk, as if she wasn't familiar with the layout of the kitchen. I was intrigued, so I watched her closely. She walked to the kitchen window, opened an imaginary door in front of it, looked up and down, closed it, turned around and walked back upstairs. I figured she was sleepwalking, chuckled to myself that it was weird, and went back to studying. A few weeks later, I found out, incidentally, from the landlord, that the tenant before the last had a brown refrigerator next to the kitchen window. I asked him if he had a picture of the place before they moved out, and the refrigerator was exactly where my sister was pretending to open a door while sleepwalking. However, I tried to explain it away as a crazy coincidence and brushed it off. But that was not the end for this apartment. Another late night studying. I was lying back on the sofa with my laptop on my chest. After an hour in that position, my back was hurting a bit, so I sat up and put my laptop on the coffee table. Just before I put it down, the table slid away from me. There was a good foot of movement. I froze, trying to process what had just happened. In California, earthquakes aren't uncommon, so I explained it away as that. Even though I knew no earthquake powerful enough to move a heavy coffee table would only affect said table. We welcomed a new addition to our house a year later. My baby sister was born, and she was the joy of our lives. I loved taking care and spending time with her. When she was 2, I was taking care of her one morning. We were alone in the apartment. After giving her a bath and clothing her, I was taking her downstairs to get something to eat. I was down a couple of stairs, and she was about to go down, when she turned back to look at the bedroom hallway. She said, "Look, there's a lady there." I grabbed her and booked it downstairs immediately. I played it off as her imagination, and once again didn't acknowledge it. Shortly thereafter, we had a roommate. He was the son of a family friend, and we gave him a place to stay temporarily. He and I stayed in the same room. Now I should preface this with the room that we were staying in had things going bump in the night. But I was in denial about it, as before. The feeling of being watched. Feeling the bottom of my mattress depressed, as if someone was sitting on it. The door opening on its own, etc. The same thing was happening to both of us when he moved in. Especially the door. It would open on its own around 4 a.m. every night. I asked everyone at home to see if they opened the door to check on us, and no one said they did. The two of us were up late one night, each on our own bed with our laptops. We heard the door handle turning, and looked up to see who was checking in on us. The door creaked open. The door handle turned back to its original position. We looked at each other. I got up, closed the door, and locked it. And we both just went to sleep, without saying a word. I was then finally convinced there was no explanation for what was happening. My roommate was an amateur rapper in Vietnamese, and would write and record his own songs. One afternoon I came back from my class and saw him lying in his bed with his headphones on, staring intently at his laptop. His face was flushed, and he looked shocked. He told me to put on the headphones and said, "Listen to this." I saw the audiogram on his playback program, and all of the spikes of his voice. A few flat seconds before he started singing, however, I saw one single spike. He played it. The voice of an old man, slightly higher pitch, saying, "Ran Len," which means, "good job," or "keep going" in Vietnamese. He was visibly scared. That was the first EVP we recorded in that room. Later, I put a recorder in the room and went to school. There was no one home during the day. Everyone either went to work or school. I got home early that day and listened to the playback while studying. In the middle of doing differential equations, I heard an older lady laughing. I would guess from her voice that she was middle-aged. I rationalized it as background noise from the apartment complex. Maybe one of the neighbors was laughing really loudly and the voice traveled into my room. After asking all the neighbors around me, it was confirmed that no one was home during that 6-hour time frame. Still, I reasoned that it must have been from another apartment nearby. One night I woke up in the middle of my sleep and knew that I was having sleep paralysis. I was on my side looking at my roommate. I couldn't fully see his face, though, because there was a pair of legs in front of it. It was clearly a pair of legs belonging to a girl or a woman. The legs began to turn around toward me, and I quickly turned my eyes. I knew she was looking at me. I pretended to be asleep. I willed myself to move and shake my head. That was my trick after years of sleep paralysis. If I could shake my head, I usually would wake up. And I did. And I saw my roommate looking at me. I could tell that he had seen her too, because of this scared expression. He turned toward the wall, and we both went to sleep. Eventually, I moved out of my parents' apartment. Apart from scaring me, I didn't feel anything malevolent there. I would come back sometimes to have a sleepover, especially when my mom cooked something that I loved, and I ate so much that I felt sleepy. One night I went to sleep in one of the rooms. Everything was normal, and I felt comfortable. My little sister's closed laptop was in the room, as it was her room after all, and she was away on a school trip. I locked the room because I didn't want any funny business that night, and went to sleep. Suddenly, I was jolted awake because loud music was playing. I turned on the light. The laptop was open, and YouTube was on. Whatever my sister had been listening to was playing. It wasn't possible, I told myself. The laptop was closed when I went to sleep. Even if I was sleepwalking, I didn't know her password to log in. My chest was pounding. Whoever was in that room wanted to play a prank with me, or wanted me to know it was there. I moved on to a professional school in another state. My first day there, I was exceptionally tired. After greeting my two flatmates, I moved my luggage into my room. I left my bags right in front of the door and crashed on the bed. I didn't even care to check if the mattress and cover was clean because I was so exhausted. I opened my eyes to another sleep paralysis. I heard the door creaking open. I saw an Asian woman. I watched her float around my luggage. I'm guessing she was Chinese because her clothes had a Chinese flowery design. The next day I dug up the history of the town where we were in, and sure enough, there is a sizable Chinese American population around there. Now that I'm married with kids, there seems to be a lull in activities. I'm a believer in the paranormal, but I'm a skeptic first. If there's something weird or something bumping in the night, I am more prone to find a rational explanation first. So I figured that was it, and there would be no more incidents. But then on a sleepover, my 2-year-old toddler told my mom he wouldn't go downstairs because Uncle was there, my grandfather. I for sure never told him about my great-grandfather. My mom dismissed it but scolded me for telling him ghost stories at night. And then, as recently as last week, I saw a little kid running across my living room and then disappear. I'm guessing that was my son's imaginary friend, because he appeared around the same time as my toddler told me. His friend was with him in bed. They both still need to go to sleep on time, though. After all, I'm a parent now, and all paranormal activity needs to be limited to 8 p.m.